Hi guys, welcome back, and to new subs, welcome. Today I thought I would show my friend Kip and anyone who's interested how useful being able to solder can be. So this is my e-bike, and let's get some light onto this. Um, First one is light, and second one are wire cutters, because they're like the two key tools I like to use. I like to see everything clearly, and the wire cutters just come in handy for everything. So here I'm going to chop off some cable ties that I've been holding on a 12 volt cigarette lighter connector that usually goes in cars. And this connector, this adapter, is what I use to put in my compressor as to pump up the tyres on the e-bike and anything else. But over the last 2 years of using this thing and treating this bike pretty mean, I've found that the connector on one side of this adapter has come off. So the first job for this e-bike today will be to clean up this connection that's a bit dodgy and resolder what I think is the negative onto this port. But with this adapter, there is no positive negative. You can solder the positive and negative onto either side. So to do that, let's bring out some tools. You don't need loads of tools to be able to solder up these easy jobs. I keep all my tools in a little box, and one of the key tools I find are cable ties, because I use them for absolutely everything. And as well as that, I need my soldering iron, which I use a soldering station rather than just a direct iron. They seem to last longer, they seem to get hotter, they just seem to do a better job. In the box I have some tape with a 24 volt bulb stuck to the bottom of one. The tape's really useful for different bits, as well as a glue gun and some wire cutters and a multimeter, which is super useful. This multimeter is missing a prong at the end because they always seem to fall off, but you can just put a bit of solder on the end and touch that to whatever voltages you're checking and it'll work fine. We have some solder with some flux in the solder, so you don't need independent flux, as well as some heat shrinks, which we'll be using to put over wires to insulate the connectors and to add strength to the soldered connected points. Here we have a box of 12 volt old school bulbs. They're pretty useful for the e-bike as to replace the bulbs whenever they break every now and again. LEDs could be better, but I'm so used to using the old school bulbs, and it doesn't matter with which way you put them in, they're just pretty handy for that. And they give out a nice glow rather than a beam. LEDs are useful for a beam. So we have the soldering iron on, and the solder's out, which is pretty high lead content. High lead content you find usually gives you better connections on a soldered patch, where doing a bit of soldering isn't too bad, but if you're going to do a lot, then you might want to do it outside to get some fresh air to blow the solder away, or do what I do and use a little fan to just suck it away from your face, because it has a habit blown into your face. Too much of it will give you lead poisoning if you're using high lead content solder. We have some heat shrinks ready to go. Let's clean off the soldering iron in preparation to do some nice solder connections. I know it seems pretty self-explanatory, but make sure you don't touch the soldering iron anywhere along the metal when you are doing the soldering, because it really will give you a nasty burn. So let's start some soldering up here. Just touch some solder to the end of the soldering iron, and then just place our wire over the part we want to solder it to, and just make sure the iron heats it up and you see that the solder melts and liquidates onto it. From there we can then put over a heat shrink, heat it up with a lighter, and we can cable tie the whole thing back onto the front of the e-bike, where I can chop off the excess cable ties with the wire cutters later on. This is super useful. It comes in handy for this compressor. Just put it into the socket, put it on the tyre, pump it up. I think this socket should be a 12 volt socket, but I think it's more about 18 or 20 volts, but everything works fine, and you find that anything that's connected up into that socket, it's handy to have extra power going into it, and it's usually rated for extra power from a car battery, say. So the front side is all working nicely. Let's plug it in, the battery into the system. We can see that we have the rear camera that is running on this front screen of the bike. That saves using mirrors on the bike and saves you from looking over your shoulder all the time. We have the right indicators, 3 bulbs for the right indicator. We have left indicator, 3 bulbs again. It's nice to see that all the bulbs are still working. I think they've been in about 12 months. Then we have the main night lights, where we have LED at the front, and we should have 2 bulbs working at the back, but I'm afraid it looks like one of the bulbs is broke, so let's clean that up today. We'll take off the rear battery from the rack, which has been sitting on a side of a PC case that I bent over to rest it on. And we can see here that the bulb has pretty much exploded when it bust. This is connected up to a 24 volt step down board, which is connected up to the 48 volt battery. We'll put some heat shrinks on the wires before we start. That way we can't forget the heat shrinks, because there's nothing worse than soldering something up and then realizing you didn't put the heat shrinks on, then having to desolder it, put the heat shrinks on, and then actually solder it up. There was some leftovers of that bulb that blew up, so just clean that off. Prep up the solder, ready to do the soldering. I took a bit of solder off from that cleanup, so let's just touch up that wire to tin it up. When you prep a wire with some solder before you solder something to it, it's often referred to as tinning. I think that's an old days reference. So with that ready to go, let's solder the bulb on. As I said before, there's no positive and negative with bulbs. There are with LEDs, so you have to check LEDs, but with a bulb you can solder the positive and negative to either side. Here I've soldered the negative to the bottom of the bulb, to that terminal, and then I'm going to solder the positive to the side of the bulb, which is considered another terminal. Let's put some heat shrinks on, heat it up with the lighter to prep it up. And then finally, with the big heat shrink, we'll use this to take any stresses on the wires, so the soldering connections aren't taking any jangling when it's being moved. And with that, we can put it back in the housing for the lights. and we could put the battery back on, tie it back up with the straps. There's a strap going around the seat to keep it in place so it doesn't slide backwards when riding. And we now have two working lights at the back, which are for the night light set, so front lights and back lights. And if you're not sure on the road, you can then put on all of the lights to really light everything up. It's handy for fog and for people who aren't paying attention. They don't realise you can see them on the screen behind you, and that way if they're getting a bit too close you can slam on all the lights and it shuts them up and they give you a bit of space again. Quite happy with this bike. It's running nice, and thanks for watching. I'd best keep this one short. Catch us up again.